The recent Sydney Festival found itself in the spotlight for the wrong reasons when it became the focus of a boycott. Over 30 artists pulled out of the festival to show solidarity with a coalition of pro-Palestinian artists, activists and academics. They objected to one of the festival's sponsors, the Israeli embassy, who donated $20,000 to support a work by the contemporary Israeli dance company Batsheva. What followed were apologies, a high-profile board resignation and heated commentary. Some of those involved saw this as an example of art washing, where sponsorship of the arts is used to distract from or even attempt to legitimise controversial issues and organisations. In simple terms, it's a quick way to improve your image by association. Some other examples where sponsorship has been publicly called into question include the 2014 Sydney Biennale's funding arrangement with Transfield, a company involved with refugee detention security on Nauru and Manus Island. Perth Festival and Perth Fringe Worlds Association with Woodside Petroleum. And that's not to mention the large amounts of money the fossil fuel industry regularly gives to many of our major arts organisations, which are often used to support shows and exhibitions. There is, of course, a long relationship between commercial money and arts patronage. What you think about this depends very much on where you stand on the ethics of those philanthropists, companies and governments. But there's one absolute certainty right now. If you're an artist, your relationship with sponsorship has become a minefield of difficult choices at a time when earning a living in the arts is harder than ever. And joining me now to make sense of this complex landscape are three people who've all had direct experience navigating these issues. Gabrielle de Vietri is an artist and activist. Rachael Maza is an actor and artistic director of Melbourne's Ilbijerri theatre company. And Ali Murphy-Oates is the managing director of the Moogahlin Performing Arts. Well, thank you all for joining me on Artworks. Gabrielle, you were the first artist to pull out of the 2014 Sydney Biennale. Can you tell me about your decision?
That was my big break, right? The height of my career. I'd spent the best part of 2 years putting together a brand new commission for that work. And I found out about a month before the exhibition opened that the major sponsor, the founding sponsor, Transfield, was negotiating a new deal with the Australian government to take over the operation of the Nauru and Manus Island immigration detention centres. And so I went through this series of urgent meetings with all the stakeholders, petition writing, letters, getting the Biennale to step up and take a position. But it got to the point where I realised that nothing that I could do would justify my participation in a chain of associations that led directly to human rights abuses. And so alongside 4 other artists, I decided to withdraw my work. And then a short while later, 4 other artists withdrew their work. What actually happened was far more than what we had expected. The chair of the Biennale and the director of Transfield resigned, and the relationship between the Biennale and Transfield was ended. The public image was starting to crack. I saw that the biggest impact that I've ever had in work that's always been aimed at social change was actually not showing my work at all. And it unveiled this kind of underbelly of the arts where we think we're doing one thing as artists, but actually there's this whole scene where the arts are being exploited for completely other purposes.
Rachael, I know Ilbijerri doesn't accept money from the fossil fuel industry, but can you share with us what you've learned about this issue as you've travelled the country?
So as a black fella in this country, for me it was a really hard line. It was like all mining is bad. All mining is happening on Aboriginal land and is at the cost of and the expense of the sovereignty of those Aboriginal people and their well-being. One of my very early directing gigs was working with Black Swan Theatre. And this was a production working with the Pilbara community in regards to the story of one of the very first Aboriginal strikes. Phenomenal story, fantastic play. This story needs to be told. Why does no one know about it? I find out somewhere in the rehearsal process that one of the biggest, and they were boasting, it was like the biggest single sponsorship for a single arts project by BHP, and I was just like, whoa, what the? So I stormed into the offices at Black Swan Theatre. I was going, what's going on? Like, we're blackfellas. Like, this community live on the very country that BHP has been ripping their iron ore from their country, and they've never received 1 cent for it. And they were like, oh no, this is actually been okayed by the family, by the community. And I was like, huh? Totally was dumbfounded. Anyway, I was like very quickly went back to the family that we were closely working with in the Pilbara, and yeah, they were like, we have finally, after all these years, we are in the process of negotiating a deal for our community with BHP. We have a 100% government-owned excavation company that we now have a deal with, that BHP will only work with our company first. So employment opportunities, economic benefits to the community. And it was at that point in time that I realised how complex it is, and that at the end of the day, you can't assume what was right for that community is right for that community.
But what a humbling learning curve as well.
Yeah.
And Ali, your play was recently in the Sydney Festival program, which, as we've heard, was caught up in the controversy due to the sponsorship from the Israeli embassy. Can I get you to talk us through what your reaction to the protest was and why you took the stance you did?
So our company, Moogahlin Performing Arts, has had a work in the Sydney Festival on and off fairly regularly since 2013, and the work that we were presenting this year is by Biripi composer Troy Russell. It's a story of his ancestors, 2 lovers fleeing from a wealthy white landowner. And when we heard about the boycott, we had some fairly rigorous conversations internally in our company about whether or not to participate. And ultimately, we felt it was stronger to tell a story about resistance against a colonial power and marry that to the call for attention to the situation in Palestine by presenting the work as it was. And so we're in this position where we had to navigate that as a public communication that we wanted to make, and also navigate those relationships with our partners, which was direct conversation with Olivia Ansell, the artistic director of the Sydney Festival, saying that we were not okay with the relationship that they had struck up with the Israeli embassy, and that while we were continuing to present the work, we would use that platform to let our audience know what our stance was. And then, of course, sliding into the DMs of the boycott organisers and making sure that they knew what our stance was as well.
So picking up on what Ali's just said, do you think there's sometimes a benefit then for artists to stay with these festivals and use their platform to, I guess, amplify their own stories and messages?
Absolutely, there is a place. And I guess what it also speaks to is that there is many ways in which artists can respond and make a stand.
I think there's also a really important conversation to be had around respect and safety amongst artists and amongst small to medium organisations as well, because the kind of cynical, fiery nature of social media can actually be really damaging. So I think that conversation is something that needs to happen with respect and integrity between artists, rather than being this incredibly public, damaging, finger-pointing exercise.
And it's interesting what you each have to say, because in fact, Sydney's Lord Mayor, Clover Moore, recently made the point that many artists, quite rightly, accept subsidies from the Australian government, even though they might be hugely critical of its refugee or climate policy. And I wonder if it's fair to expect artists and curators to scrutinise the financial conditions that give them and their work access to an audience.
Very complex again. But I will just say that government money is our money. So that is our money that I pay my taxes towards, so that should be going towards us, and they should be properly funding the arts. And this is at the heart of the issue, is that the government is so inadequately and so undervalues the arts, and hence the pittance of our GDP that goes towards the arts, and that is at the heart of the problem.
But who does that duty of care and responsibility fall to then? Is it the event organisers? I mean, clearly it's the artists that are going in, they're jumping in and doing the hard yards. Where does the transparency lay within that process?
I think there's responsibility at all levels. You know, at Moogahlin we've developed a set of values in conversation actually with our big cousins, Ilbijerri, and a bunch of other First Nations artists and organisations on this continent and globally around what our responsibilities are when going into partnership.
It really is incumbent on organisations to have those conversations and establish where their parameters are so that it doesn't constantly fall on the artists to suffer the financial and reputational burden of making difficult decisions.
I guess my final question is, can the Australian arts industry actually survive without relying on money from controversial sources?
I think you said it in the question there. It's an industry, and that is rooted in capitalism, unfortunately. So if we place the value on money being the thing that fuels the arts, no, it can't. But if we're talking about our deep need for cultural expression and working through problems through cultural arts and creativity, it's limitless, but we live in reality.
The only thing I'd add to that is that it's easier to get paralysed by the feeling that it's too big and too hard, and to be reminded about the massive change that has happened when people stand together about something that's important. I look to what happened at Sydney Biennale and at Sydney Festival, and I scream with joy and thank God for the artists, because we have moments that remind us that we can make change and that change is possible.
Rachael, Ali and Gabrielle, thank you all so much.
Thanks, Namila.
Thank you.